t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as fait manquer, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as préféré, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Brussels, My Love, our weekly European politics show, bringing you up to speed on the happenings in Brussels. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up this week, car sales in Europe are down and stress levels among European car makers are up. With Chinese car makers leading the way in EVs and batteries, the EU Commission President sat down with the European car CEOs in a bid to calm their fears. With additional pressure on the sector to be clean and go electric, we're taking a look at the existential crisis facing the car industry and the climate. And remember Mario Draghi, the former ECB chief and Italian premier? He filed a damning report to the European Commission this time last year. He warned that the EU should fix its fragmented single market or, quote, die a slow agony. 1 year later, we hear if anything has changed for the better or if the EU is still a laggard and not a leader. A warm welcome to our guest this weekend, Conor Allen, a lobbyist, welcome, Chloe Michalak, climate influencer and activist, and Julius Fintelman, editor and founder of the European Correspondent. Great to have you all with us, thank you. But as usual, before we bring in our panel, let's just hear why the European car industry is hogging all the headlines of late.
Stuttering sales, high energy prices, growing global competition and an uncertain trade environment have plunged the European car industry into a spiraling crisis. Last spring, the EU launched an industrial action plan which includes funds for battery producers, but such initiatives have failed to change the overall gloomy outlook. The car makers are particularly frustrated over a lack of pragmatic policy plan for the industry's transformation. They demand lower energy costs for charging, more purchase subsidies and tax reductions, and especially a better charging infrastructure to make switching to electric vehicles an obvious choice for a critical mass of European consumers. If this doesn't work out, should the ban of new combustion engine cars from 2035 be delayed?
So that is the question. Interesting times for the sector that employs some 13.8 million people. Conor, let's bring in you first. On the biggest challenge perhaps for the sector, is it transitioning to zero-emission cars? Is it rising Chinese competition? Or is it perhaps the Trump tariffs?
Well, I mean, all three of these, but they all reflected one particular example of this, which is the Commission's 2035 ban. We need some sort of runway in order to have this transition happen. Okay, we've had electric cars for a long time now. They've been around for a very long time, and they have not broken into the market in the way the Commission would have liked. There is small growth in the amount of EVs being uptaken, but it's not enough. It's not where it needs to be. And at the moment, the industry is being squeezed between a rock and a hard place. Yes, we have competition from China. Yes, we have some issues with Trump tariffs. But it's being squeezed by the regulation on one end and the consumer reality on the other. So, in fact, if all these things aren't going in the industry's way, I think the Commission has to look at that 2035 ban and maybe think about postponing that just 5 years, give us a bit more runway.
Chloe, would you agree with that? Postponement of just 5 years? A better runway in Conor Allen's terms?
No, absolutely not. I mean, this target has been around for now a few years, and there were discussions already on transitioning for the industry for years. And what we've been seeing this year is that we've already given in a lot of flexibility to the industry, even though they've known for years and years and years that this change was coming. President Commission von der Leyen has said it, Draghi has said it, the future is electric and Europe will be part of it. And I'm really glad to see that they're showing positive signs that they're going to hold on to this target, even though there's a massive pressure from the industry. But I think what's the most worrying to me is really all of those talks about tech neutrality, which basically is a catch-all buzzword to say we're going to try to get loopholes in the regulation to not be compliant by 2035, right? So there's on one side the possibility to extend, as Connor suggested, and then there's what the industry is doing and is asking for, which is tech neutrality. And I think in Brussels, lobbying battles tend to be won not by big announcements such as delaying by 5 years. I think that's completely unrealistic. But I think what the industry is really trying to do is push for those technical victories that the vast majority of people are not going to know about, but which eventually will be a disaster for the climate, which will be a disaster for people's health, but also for the industry from a competitiveness perspective.
Well, whatever happens, the industry needs clarity and the consumer also needs clarity, right, Julius?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, I think much of this debate of delaying this ban of combustion engines seems a bit made up, because I cannot really imagine consumers in 10 years' time still buying combustion engine vehicles. We see now that electric vehicle sales are up in Germany alone, 35% in the first half of 2025 compared to last year. These numbers will keep going up, and EVs are already now so much cheaper in maintaining them, not in buying them. You have a bigger initial investment, as far as I understand, but in actually then maintaining them, charging is cheaper than gas, and I don't think that will change.
Well, Connor, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just jump in there? Because, Julius, everything you're saying is right, OK? And if the consumer demand is there, why do we need the regulation if the consumer demand is there? We're inflicting enormous damage on the car industry. We're seeing factories close across the continent. That's beginning to change. We saw Toyota invest in Czechia recently, but it's not enough to combat the closure after closure after closure. We saw the Audi factory in Brussels. How many people's jobs have to be sacrificed in order to enable this transition?
If I may, on the jobs, I think it's completely non-realistic, to say that we're not going to have job closure even if we keep combustion engine vehicles. I mean, the transition is going to happen. China is transitioning. India is transitioning. We're seeing South Africa as well. So I think it's actually lying to people to maintain the illusion that we're going to maintain jobs if we don't transition to electric. There are jobs that are going to be lost. Let's not kid ourselves, and let's not lie to the workers, but also to consumers. I think the question is, how do we ensure that there are as little job losses as possible? How regions where there are jobs linked to the industry are supported in order to transition? And where do we create these new jobs? And that is in the new e-mobility ecosystem. But to say they're not going to be job losses if we don't transition, that's a massive lie. And I think we need to start being really realistic with people and tell them the truth.
There won't be any job losses if the transition is guided by the market and not regulation.
No, they will be.
Because you're responsive to consumer
It's
demand.
absolutely not true. There will be job losses, even if you transition. But the question is, how do we make sure that there are as few job losses as possible and that this transition is supported, especially in the regions that are the most affected? But to say, if we transition, there's not going to be any job losses, if it's supported by the market, I'm sorry, Connor, but that's a lie.
If we're making the profits, there's going to be no job
That's a
losses.
lie.
There's going to be 100,000 job losses this year, according to the German Federal Ministry.
Yeah. I mean, and I think 50,000 already this year happened in the first half when I looked numbers up. And yeah, but I do believe what Chloe is saying is absolutely right. I mean, as you know, Connor, best, I think electric vehicles are so much easier to produce. They need less manufacturing than internal combustion vehicles. So there will be job losses, even if it is regulated by the market. And I think hinging on to that goal of now relaying that ban for internal combustion engines just seems a bit like a scarecrow and doesn't really actually change the reality.
It's just 5 years. It's just 5 years.
Then it's 5 years once, and then it's 5 years again.
Well, no, what we just talked about, 155,000 job losses. 10% of Europe's labour force works in automotive or automotive adjacent. How many people's jobs have to be sacrificed for an extra 5 years? Okay, or what about changing the 100% to 90%? Hybrid technology, fantastic. We can reduce transport emissions by 90% instead of 100%. That's fantastic.
And is the political support there then for that extension?
I'm not too sure. I think one of the very...
Definitely an interesting debate.
Well, absolutely. And, there are obviously two sides to the debate, but very well reflected in this room.
We had this debate, by the way, 2 years ago when the announcement was official.
Yeah, and I was lobbying.
And you were... Yeah.
I was lobbying on that then. And I went to the Commission and I had Commission officials tell me, oh, well, you're the car industry, you can afford to dip into your pocket. Well, now the car industry is dipping into its pocket, and look at how many people are losing their jobs because of it.
But that was, of course, pre-Trump as well. you know, things have changed as well since the Trump tariffs came in, and they're hitting steel and aluminium as well, Julie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think car makers are reporting how much these tariffs cost them. I think 400 million Porsche said or something, and Stellantis said 300 million euros. So yeah, but can we change that? I think for that to change, I don't really see another way than to either look for other markets or look internally how we can improve our industries.
I mean, we're talking about job losses, but we're not talking about job creation. Yeah. And there will be massive job creation in the whole ecosystem.
Tell our viewers that, because I'm sure we have viewers there who have family members, brothers, cousins who are losing their jobs in the sector. So how can they feel reassured by this transition?
I think it's interesting to see that some manufacturers, and I'm thinking of Renault, already has training workshops in some of the factories to ensure that their workers can transition to start working on electric vehicles. And then, of course, there's the whole ecosystem, because we're really focusing, we're looking at this through the lens of manufacturers. But the ecosystem is much wider. If we're looking at electric vehicles, there's the battery, the recycling, the charging infrastructure. These are thousands of jobs. And there was actually a letter signed by 150 CEOs to the Commission of that e-mobility platform that was saying, we've already invested billions, we've already created 150,000 jobs, and there will be many more created if we're able to stay strong on that target and have that visibility that all businesses are asking for in order to secure
investment. Because they got that signal 2 years ago. So if you move the goalposts, it creates uncertainty. But I just want to go back to, you mentioned Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President. She was speaking last week, of course, in Strasbourg, and she had a passionate message about her views on the future of the car here. Take a look.
Millions of Europeans want to buy affordable European cars. So we should invest in small, affordable cars, both for the European market, but also to meet the surge that we see in the global demand. And this is why we will propose to work with industry on a new small, affordable car initiative. I believe Europe should have its own e-car. The future of cars and the cars of the future must be made here in Europe.
So, is that realistic, Conor?
Well, I mean, I think it's very interesting. I work for a Japanese company, and this speech by von der Leyen really set Japan ablaze, because Japan is known for its small electric cars, called the K-car. But it raises more questions than answers, because really, we're going to have the Commission designing automobiles for consumers. That's not going to go well. Okay, it's completely devoid of consumer demand. If the demand is there, automakers will already deliver. You see things like the Citroën Ami, right? Like you have small European cars now. Why does the Commission have to get involved if the consumer demand is there, as she says?
I was in the hemicycle when she made those comments, and there was heckling from the far right, from the right and from the centre. Do you think she ruffled some feathers there with that comment?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think what I found interesting is that with that comment and with several comments that she made in that speech, that she threw quite a lot of carrots towards her left partners, the Socialists and Democrats.
And no red meat to her party.
Exactly, and that I found quite interesting, yeah.
What about you, Chloe?
I think it's really interesting what you just said, Conor, because for years and years, the problem that manufacturers have been having is that they made the decision to focus on producing and selling big SUVs that people don't need. I mean, I don't know how many people walk around Brussels, but there's SUVs everywhere that are taking all the space. And in order to increase their profits, they've been focusing for years on making SUVs instead of small cars. The demand is there for small cars. It's not there for SUVs. But manufacturers have chosen that path instead. And I think more globally, if we look at, whether the Commission should get involved in the strategy, we have been presented with a clean industrial strategy, right? So the Commission has said we want to support the European industry to decarbonize. And what we're seeing is that we do need that. It's not happening yet, but with the right support. And I'm thinking, for instance, a European preference that says that half, let's say, of components from electric cars should come from Europe. And there has been a study that have found that if we do implement that, we could actually have 81% of electric vehicles in Europe in 2030, produced in Europe. So we just need the right regulatory framework and not just let it up to the market.
That means monitoring, of course, then the supply chains. You're disagreeing with that?
Absolutely, 100%. How are you going to make a cheap electric vehicle? Well, two things to what you said there, Chloe. Number one, it is cheaper and it's significantly an easier engineering challenge to electrify a larger car than it is a smaller car. That's because engines weigh more, they're larger. SUVs are the most profitable electric thing. So if you want electric vehicles, you have to go for SUVs first, and then produce the smaller ones later.
We don't need SUVs.
And the second thing you mentioned is this European preference in the supply chain. So how are you going to make things cheaper if you're choosing artificially European manufacturers with the highest energy costs in history, the highest labour costs in the world, compared to, yes, even a Chinese-made component? Or what about Japanese or American or Turkish-made?
But then, Connor, if we don't do that, let's say, so that means that the clean industrial deal shouldn't exist, that basically the EU shouldn't support its own industry because anyway, at this moment, it's cheaper to produce elsewhere. So if that is your point, then let's say goodbye to Europe's industry and let's say, fine, we're going to import everything industrial from China.
So we say goodbye to free trade then? So should we just embrace protectionism, build the barriers, and make sure no product can enter the US
that you love,
market?
for instance, that you take often as an example, is...
Where they have a lot of SUVs.
Yes, they have a lot of
Everyone
SUVs,
has a massive car.
Is implementing a form of protectionism. And if we're serious about having a true European industrial strategy, that requires planning, that requires strategizing, and that requires indeed investment and some sort of policy intervention. We cannot say, let's just make sure that the market is the driving force here, because if we do that, that's basically just saying yes to everything that comes from China, and that basically means we increase our dependency to other countries. And I'm sorry, but that's not the kind of Europe I want in 10 years.
Well, I mean, if you want
Julius,
a communist republic...
I mean, I think from a consumer perspective, from someone that wants to buy a car, I personally, as a consumer, I wouldn't really care where that car comes from. What I want is I want it to be cheap, I want it to be affordable, and I probably want it to be electric because that is the future. And if that means, hey, do we need to look at the regulation towards Chinese cars, e-vehicles in Europe? Yeah, then that means we have to look for that. But personally, I think from a citizen's perspective, doesn't really matter if it's European or not. But we need more e-vehicles in Europe, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, on that point, we actually had a chat with Romain de Nayer. He's the senior e-mobility advisor for EV Belgium, because of course a lot of people, they perhaps want to go electric, but they're worried about being stuck without a charger. Take a look.
So the main barriers today is perception, and it's a real issue that we see everywhere in Europe. Although we see that buying prices of EV are getting lower, that they are getting more accessible, and that the total cost of ownership, so the TCO, is getting more advantageous every day, and even often, in most cases, is more advantageous than other types of vehicles. The second barrier we see today is the presence of charging infrastructure, still perceived as an issue. While we have celebrated the 1 millionth charging point in Europe, we know that there are still some regions where there are problems, but also there the charging will grow in the coming years.
Romain de Nayer there. Interesting that he says the biggest roadblock today is perception. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that's a kind of big state approach, right? If you have to explain to consumers that actually, no, you're wrong, things are cheaper than you think, and things are more accessible than you think, so you should buy these things, you've gone wrong somewhere, because consumers are smart, they know how to think for themselves. And at the moment, consumer demand for EVs, yes, it's growing, it's not growing fast enough.
Well, he said we have 1 million charging points in Europe, but the car sector says we need 9 million by 2035. Is it the charging problem or is it perception, Chloe, in your view?
I think it's definitely perception. And I think, of course, consumers are smart, but there's also some very targeted lobbying campaigns from the people and the industries that don't want anything to change, that are presenting EVs as something that is difficult, that is something that is difficult to charge, that will take longer for people to travel, etc. So we can't
the
really
reality
say,
is,
and for elites as well, because it's too expensive. So perception is definitely a huge problem there. And I'm glad to see that there's more and more, high-profile figures. I'm thinking of this F1 driver. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with F1 driver's name, who made this post on LinkedIn, I think over the summer, saying, basically, I am so happy to have this EV. This has not really added that long to my trip. It's actually really comfortable. So I think more and more people are starting to realize, but that perception issue is definitely there.
Even though the reality on the ground is it's now in the Netherlands and Germany where we have the most chargers. So if I wanted to drive from Brussels to Spain, it would be quite risky.
Well, I mean, I don't drive an EV. I don't drive from that many cars myself. But I do think that for some reason, cars and electric vehicles have become kind of a culture war battleground. Whereas in my mind, it really doesn't have to be. We see in Germany alone that charges have increased by 20,000 in the first 6 months or 5 months of this year, and that's huge. And I think there is a perception problem there. As Chloe said, there is massive amounts of money that's being spent to portray EVs as something that they're not, and there's been in Germany especially chronic underinvestment into actually the future of the automotive industry, which was electric, and that was known for decades. And yet it wasn't really properly addressed.
I've done the trip, just so you know, Belgium to Spain in an electric car, and it went perfectly fine.
Well, there you go. Perfect proof there from Chloe, one of our panellists. What's your take on all this? How we can improve the gap, for example? We have so many charging stations in France, in Belgium, or in the Netherlands, and Germany, but not in other parts of Europe.
Well, I think it's an interesting problem. But I mean, first of all, we know we're talking about elites and then holding up Formula One drivers as the examples of EV drivers. But no, I mean, I think
cultural influence. It's not that it's just for
of the
F1
elites.
drivers.
You have this, very urban elite. You have people maybe in the commission. They've never driven a car. They ride their bicycle to work, and they don't have the same experiences as someone in rural Italy. Go to southern Catalonia, go to rural Greece, and it's a very different set of problems I think people here in Brussels are very much blind to. But I mean, I'll more or less agree with you. Like, let's increase the number of charge points. Let's make them fast as well, by the way, because if you need to do 20 minutes to charge your car, it's useless.
I don't think 20 minutes is useless. I've actually really enjoyed my trip. You can go for a coffee. If you have kids, it's great for the kids to actually walk around the car and stretch their legs. If you have furry babies, as I do, it's great to walk the dog as well. It's actually completely fine. And everyone I've met who drives an EV has said that at the most, it adds, depending on the distance, it adds between 40 minutes to 1 hour to a trip. I don't think that's completely unmanageable. And most people that drive electric vehicles just mention the comfort, the noise, and just overall, I think we haven't mentioned this in this debate today, but the health angle is really, really important. And it's not playing a big enough part in this debate. One of the main reasons also why we need to phase out combustion engine cars, it's because it's extremely polluting and it's affecting people's health, and especially children and elderly's health. So if we don't also take that into the debate, we're going to continue to have premature death, thousands every year across Europe, and that is a massive
That's
problem.
a topic I've covered a lot, in fact, as a reporter here at Euronews. So if anyone wants to read more about that or anything we have discussed today, do take a look at euronews.com. But now we can close this conversation. Thank you so much to our panellists, but don't you go anywhere, because we'll be back very soon. We'll be throwing back to last year when Mario Draghi presented his report on the EU's existential crises. And this week, the former ECB bank president said things are actually worse. See you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, our weekly European politics show with me, Maeve McMahon. Well, this week, Mario Draghi came to Brussels to remind lawmakers that it's already 1 year since he warned in a 400-page report that the EU could, quote, die a slow death if it didn't overhaul and simplify regulations, improve access to finance and make it easier for startups and scaling up. And this week, in a very frank speech, the former Italian Premier said that 1 year after this damning report, Europe is actually in a harder place and EU public debt could rise by 10% in the near future. So, Julius, has anything changed since the Mario Draghi report? Have any of the recommendations been implemented?
Well, of course, Mario Draghi, incredibly important figure in European politics, and I think his report really gave the new Commission and Europe more generally a roadmap of what to do. And I think 1 year on, when we look back, we see that not much of that roadmap has been done. I think the most crucial element, what he was calling for, was a massively bigger budget that basically funds the entire operation of the EU. The budget that the EU Commission presented before the summer is not anywhere close to what Draghi called for, which I believe was around 800 billion a year. The overall budget for 7 years is around 2 trillion, so it's not even half. And for that, we need that kind of budget. And to get there, he proposed things such as joint debt, joint borrowing by EU member states, something that, except when it comes to defence, we've seen some progress there. But beyond that, that's not really a thing that's popular among member states.
You repeated that again this week. I know the Commission has launched this European Innovation Act. It's to help products get from the lab to the market quicker. There was also the omnibus packages to this competitive compass. Any kind of things there that you'd like to comment on?
Well, it's all just coming so slowly, isn't it? And, we can talk about whether we agree with it or not, but this is the approach they've chosen. It's coming so slowly. I think the Commission's quite demotivated because they've taken so many losses recently. Look at the hit with the Trump trade deal, for example, and look at the omnibus. they are being asked to go back over the last 5 years and alter all the legislation.
Do all the work they've done.
And then what they do, it's tweaks, okay? It's not actually, someone like me would say total deregulation, but they're not doing that. Someone like Chloe might say, don't touch it. But they're just making teeny tiny tweaks, and it's not helping anybody. It's crazy.
It's not helping anybody. Would you agree, Chloe? And just reminding our viewers as well, there was a lot as well in that report about the ageing population here in Europe, labour shortages. Like, it's really worth a read if people have time. Even the summary.
Yeah, no, nothing has changed pretty much. It's all words at this stage, especially on the whole industrial side of things. Once again, not much has changed. And meanwhile, we're actually increasing our dependence to the US, for instance, with that 700 billion in LNG imports that we've committed to. So Draghi is really saying that decarbonization is the key to independence and, strategic autonomy for Europe. And he mentioned it again a few days ago, and von der Leyen also mentioned it again. And we're actually going in the wrong direction. And also, I think what we've seen over the past year is that the Draghi report has been politically hijacked to be used as a justification to kill green rules. And this is not what Draghi actually says. I've read the line, and I don't think many people in Brussels have read that line specifically. Yes, it calls for simplification, but it doesn't call for that level of simplification on climate and green rules. So I think it's very important to say there is an intent, really strong intent on decarbonization as a pathway for Europe, and this is not respected. And yes, I agree with you, it's being unrolled way too slowly. A lot of things have not even begun to be thought about, so there's a massive problem there.
But I think also important here is that there's a tendency to always blame the EU Commission for this, but a massive reason for this is the blocking that the member states are doing.
And Parliament.
And Parliament as well. And if there is no way for the Commission to actually act without member states blocking just about everything that would nag at their sovereignty, then, much of the Draghi report will remain a fantasy.
Shall we eliminate oversight from the Parliament and Council? I don't think so. But second time, I'm glad this is on television. I agree with Chloe again, because you look at the opportunity we have in net zero industries. It's fantastic. The USA is cutting funding for these industries with the Inflation Reduction Act. Europe has a great opportunity. Throw the money in there. That this is the approach you've taken. Where is the money? No one knows where the money is.
Instead, 750 billion to LNG
and
from
speed
the US.
up. I mean, that was the warning as well from Draghi this week. Speed up or we will fall behind the US, China and India. And another priority that Mario Draghi set out was closing this innovation gap in advanced technologies, a topic that comes up a lot. But this was disputed by Michael Pinto. He's the managing director of Circular Materials, and we chatted with him earlier this week.
The problem's not a gap in innovation. Europeans are plenty innovative. What we need is to make it easier to scale and commercialize the technologies that we do develop and to keep them here as companies. And the answer to that question is obviously to address fragmentation. We have to make Europe one single frictionless market that benefits all 450 million citizens. And for that to happen, we need all the actors to play ball together. That's not just the European Commission. That's actually the member states. It's the regions within each country. And we need to make it a palatable proposition for investors.
Making a point similar to what you made, like there's a lot really in the hands of the member states here in order to have real change.
Yeah, and I think also it's like, of course, there needs to be less fragmentation. But I think overall, there's the issue of the money that's also really there. And there's the issue of the policy intervention. And that goes back to the discussion that we were having before. We need a better framework and we need more policy intervention to make sure that the Draghi reports can be implemented. And we can't leave that to the market alone, like it's been done for years and years, because otherwise we won't have an
And in the
industrial
tech
strategy.
field, it was quite interesting what Draghi said about the field of AI. He even suggested pausing the AI Act that the EU institutions are so proud of. How did that point go down here?
I think the usage of the word pride is very important there. And I see in my lobbying, all these things on data processing, on AI, there's this kind of proud personal attachment to regulations that are really hurting. I mean, Draghi is saying that AI Act implementation will hurt industry. And so very, very, if you're talking about people's own personal attachment to these regulations, which shouldn't happen, by the way, that should inform you as to how that's gone down.
Julius?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it when it comes to tech and when it comes to data regulations, there's often this tendency from tech firms themselves to call for, oh, we're extremely overregulated. But when you talk to some of the actors in the field, when you talk to people inside companies, I've recently talked to someone at Signal who was saying, yeah, it's not overregulation, it's simply regulate. That's also a scarecrow that industry likes to throw to prevent further regulation. I think the AI Act is one example where the EU actually was ahead globally and set a standard, and abandoning that to me seems premature.
Again, it's all about signals. Well, we can actually bring this conversation to a close. Thank you so much to our panel for being with us, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon here on Euronews. Hello there and welcome to Brussels, My Love, our weekly European politics show here on Euronews. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this weekend I'm joined by Conor Allen, a lobbyist, Chloe McLachlan, a climate activist, and Julius Fintelmann, the editor and founder of the European Correspondent. And together we're just taking a look at the news of the week. And one that stood out was a proposal to deploy soldiers to the streets of the Belgian capital of Brussels to tackle drug-related crime. The plan, which is spearheaded by the Belgian Home Affairs Minister, would also include an investment of €20 million for a network of security cameras. So I'm curious to hear what you all think of this proposal. Chloe?
Sure. Can go first. I think it's not a great idea, let's be honest. Yes, there is a problem with drug-related violence in Brussels, for sure. But I don't think putting the army in the streets is going to help. That's really a communication move by the government at a time where it's deeply unpopular in Belgium for many, many reasons. And it's not going to sort the real reasons for drug violence. It's actually just going to probably displace the traffic from one neighborhood to the other. We have a very small army. I say we because I'm Belgian, but we have a tiny army in Belgium. And we keep hearing that we need to be prepared in order for this army to be deployed to a potential conflict, right, in the current context. So putting military in the street that won't have any power to search people or to arrest people, it's just a really bad idea.
It's a big issue, right? That's the big debate here in Belgium. They wouldn't have any legal powers to actually intervene, and they're pretty scandalised by the proposal. What's your take on it, Conor?
I disagree totally. I think if we look across the pond to the United States, they've had some fantastic successes in making LA and DC crime-free. And I'm saying this as a person. Last night I was walking home and I was, being hassled by these group of people. The safest that Brussels has ever been is just after the Malbec bombings in 2015.
That's because there was no one in the street.
Why? Because we had for 3 months afterwards military in the street, and suddenly you walk around Gare du Nord, which is full of the craziest, weirdest people on planet Earth, and they melt away. They don't want to be there when there's a man with a gun at the end of the street. They don't have to be searching people. They are a visible security presence. And, these left-wing arguments, they're always about empathy for the criminal. It's always about empathy for these people who are making our cities unsafe. What about the empathy for the people who have to live with weird, addicts hassling them on the streets?
I think we all in this round here live in this city, and I think this comes down to what kind of city and society do we want to live in. I don't want to live in a society where the only way that the government thinks it can keep us safe is to deploy the army, which is not meant to be used inside a country, is to deploy that on its own citizen or on its own residents. That's not the kind of society that I want to live in.
And many here feel that there should be more investment in the judicial system instead of perhaps surveillance. But let's hear from more people who live here in Brussels about how they feel about having soldiers patrolling their streets to fight crime.
I'm not sure that it would make me feel safer. I think it would draw more attention.
It's a bit naive to feel like that drug violence or drug problems in Brussels are like something that is isolated, when of course we have another city like Antwerp, which is very close, and like the old issues with the port.
We already had some soldiers when we had the attacks, so I guess yes, it would be maybe give the feeling to be more comforting.
It was the insecurity and the violence, because I think soldiers are soldiers and their training, it's fighting or whatever. I think that won't help at all.
So most people, Conor, are against the idea.
What do you mean, most people? The people who were interviewed there were English-speaking elites, probably working in the Eurobubble. I have lived in places like Molenbeek. I've worked in working-class jobs here in Brussels. And if you go and speak to Belgian people, they don't want to live subject to the whims of the bottom 10% of society who are causing all the problems.
Do you feel safe in Brussels, Chloe?
Yes, I actually do feel safe. And I've lived in different cities in Europe, and I actually do feel safe in Brussels. And I think there's several things. You mentioned Gare du Nord, for instance. The reason why also the crime is so high around Gare du Nord
That's
is
the
because,
North Station, the main train station.
Exactly. And this is also because a lot of the people that live around there are people that came to Belgium and that the government has an obligation to house and to basically find ways to make them feel welcome in Belgium. And the government hasn't been doing that. So a lot of these people are actually themselves taking drugs to probably forget the situation that they're in. And one of the things that we don't really mention when we talk about drug-related violence in cities, in capital cities, is also the responsibility of consumers. And I'm not talking about specifically these people, but there are a lot of people that take drugs for leisure, right? When they party on the weekends, and we're not really talking about this. And this is a crucial aspect if you want to reduce drug-related violence in Brussels. So yes, more means in the judicial system, more means for the police, but no, the army industry is not going to solve anything.
You make all the excuses for the perpetrators of the crimes, and you don't think at all about the people who have to live with the crimes. You can explain this away, but people have to deal with that.
I've lived in
when you
areas
talk
like
about
that.
these people arriving in the country, do you think they want to be living with next door to addicts, next door to people committing crime?
Yeah, but
that's
what about
the most.
Do you think that the military in the streets will seriously solve that problem? Do you think the military in the streets will seriously solve the problem of drugs coming into Belgium, coming into the Netherlands? No, this is not something that can be fixed with just sort of
cameras fix it. What about surveillance cameras like we have in London?
I mean, I think surveillance, yeah, to some extent certainly, but I also think we need to have more innovative solutions than trying to control public spaces and trying to put people and soldiers and police and surveillance cameras into places where people are
And it's a problem of a lack of investment
missing.
in neighbourhoods in the cities, in many cities.
And I mean, Brussels is extremely complicated, like the whole of Belgium, pretty much. So, you've got some police who have authority in certain areas and not in others. There are problems also of communication between the police. We've seen this during the terror attack. Some levels of police were informed while some others weren't. So I think let's focus on this first. Let's invest more in the police and in the judicial system, and let's see where we get there. But it's not the moment. Also, if we're all talking about, potential conflict and stuff like that, is it really where we want our soldiers to be? Don't we want them to be in training centres?
57 shootings, and you can see Brussels getting a bad reputation for this issue, drawing negative headlines.
Absolutely, and you mentioned surveillance cameras are being posted in London. London, not exactly a crime-free city. What we need is a visible security presence. We've talked about funding for the police. How much funding do they want? We pay 50% income taxes. I've had to use the police here. I know people who've gone in the police, and the police say, we're not going to go in and solve this crime. We know where the thief is. We're not going to go into it because it's too dangerous for us. They're not doing their jobs, so therefore the military has to step in and provide a visible security presence.
The police is underfunded. The police is underfunded.
And that is a debate for another day, because now we can bring this conversation to a close. Thank you so much, Conor Allen, Chloe Mikulakczak and Julius Fintelman for being our guests this weekend. If you would like to join in the conversation, reach out. BrusselsMyLove@euronews.com. That is our email address. You can also find us on social media. Take care. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.